It's so lovely to see all of you here. Thanks for joining us. So before we get started with the Frank Connor Show, we need to properly thank John Gable. Yes. Jack Gable, could you join us up here for just 1 second, please?
Over here?
Over here is good. Over here, yes. So, everyone, if you haven't had a chance, before you leave today, please take a minute to appreciate the art over here that Mr. Gable donated his time to work on this book and this artwork for Frank. So Frank will tell you a little bit about what those two paintings represent. Right now, he will. Yes.
We need to read the book.
And they're in more detail in the book, of course, as well. Jack has been a long-time supporter of People Plus. He has paintings that hang, which gallery in DC?
Just that they hang is
And they're paid for.
And what DC gallery?
the William Hotel and the Smithsonian.
Has anyone heard of the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C.? Yes. So Jack has paintings that hang there, as well as, is it the Porsche? What's the car company that you do so much art for? Audi. Audi, yes, the Audi head corporate.
Ferrari.
And Ferrari. Okay, so anyway, he's world famous, and we're thrilled to have him in our little town of Bath, right next door. He and Frank have been friends for...
Long time.
Oh, okay.
I've been his friend longer than he's been.
So we were very honored the first time Frank wrote a book to have Jack partner with us and be willing to work on the artwork, which was used both on the front and back cover. So the front cover of that is those two little piggies, which is a picture Frank took years ago.
Years ago.
That was in the Times record. And then the
Right.
back cover is Frank's cousin and family member dragging that tree up, and Frank took that picture, and it was also in the Times record years ago. And then, of course, he wrote the columns that correlated to the photos. So we thought, wouldn't that be great if we could get some of that amazing artwork? So Jack painted both of those paintings, donated them to People Plus, and they were auctioned off at Music in April, and brought in even more revenue for the organization, because that's what he does, is he gives back. So here we go, book number 2. We couldn't do it again without Jack. So Frank calls him up and says, hey, bestie old pal, you know, how about some more paintings? They get together, and out comes this beautiful artwork. The stones are in Frank and Jane's front yard, and the deer with the old farm equipment that Frank won't haul out of the backyard.
I haul that into my backyard.
You know, Jonathan does that too. What is it about Mainers that they like old farm equipment laying around?
Some of the old
like
ladies that like it.
nostalgic.
I like it. Yeah.
Anyway, so those are both images from Frank and Jane's property, which is just lovely. So Jack came over and did a study of them and took pictures and painted the whole thing, and he actually gave to Frank the framed painting of the rock garden. If you could please put your hands together. For Jack, we have a poinsettia. And you don't even have to donate $5 for Meals on Wheels. And we've got a nice bag of grapes out here for you too. From Midcoast Hunger Prevention.
Bet you probably jump him and grab $5.
Right, make him give Russell $5.
My wife will love this, as will I. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, they're actually gorgeous. So thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Don't eat the leaves, Jack.
Don't eat the leaves. You have to eat like a pound of them to make them a problem. But anyway, all right. So everyone, thanks for being here. We're really thrilled to have you all come and meet Frank if you don't already know him, to learn a little bit about his life and his stories, his collection. Part of this book, the back half, are letters that Frank wrote while he was in Vietnam. He was there for a year, and he wrote daily about life experiences. So I just want to thank you for going through that journey, because I really think you're going to touch so many people with this. And again, he has donated all the proceeds back to People Plus. So thanks.
There'll be no proceeds unless you buy books.
And I just have to tell everybody, under here, Jill gave him water and 3 Oreo cookies. In case, like, he gets low blood sugar while he's talking.
I specifically asked for hot dogs and Nothing.
I think we did that for the first book. This is the second book. There'll be no pictures of this book, you know, it's like your
Thank you,
second
Stacy.
child.
Can you hear me if I don't use this?
No, they cannot hear you if you don't use
Oh, I
that.
have to hold it
Do
open.
you want it on the stand?
No.
He needs to use the microphone, right? Yeah.
Jane was here and she just left.
Yeah.
She's heard all the stories, and I was going to introduce her as Xander's handler. Xander was with her, and I hope you saw him. He's
Beautiful.
I dedicated my book to my 3 grandboys,
Oh.
and this one.
He's cute.
He is cute. And I got to tell you first, just to get it over with, they're probably the reasons that I took my letters and put them all together
Hold the
and
microphone to your mouth, please.
put all the letters together in a nice little book. They were in a box under my bed. And after my mother passed, my sisters found a few more sheaths of letters, I guess we'd call it. And it was, so they all got together and they all went under my bed for a year or two. And the 50th year of my service did come up, and I have different ways of dealing with that, I guess. And one of them was that I decided that we should keep them all, get them all together, and going forward, whoever wants them can have them, and we may put them in the music and April auction this year. And see if Susan Wilson wants them. Gotta say, and since Jane left, I can tell you, when Speaking Frankly came out, she said, you know, if you got Jack Gable on the front cover and the back cover, doesn't really matter what's inside. So that's, and I got to clarify one thing. When the first day that I met Jack, that I remember meeting Jack, was he came to my office and he says, I want to meet the guy that my mother says treats me better than he does. That's where the relationship started. We've done pretty well since then, haven't we? Yeah. Jack's a good guy. He's also a Vietnam vet, and so we share a lot of common factors. So I don't know how I can hold this and then. So my goal today is to read 2 or 3 of my essays. Read a little bit of an introduction to my letters. Some of you I know were at the last Veterans Day. I did a presentation here. So yes, they are the same letters. There's we aren't printing any new ones. And so we're just going to touch on that briefly, and then we'll have you be open for questions or something like that. Okay? Thank you all for coming today. You're all wonderful folks, except maybe 2 or 3 of you. And you know who you are. Since Jane left, I should recognize that 2 of my older sisters are in the audience, so. Stand up, girls. Yeah. I keep saying one of these days I'm going to have to write a story about my childhood, and then somebody like Stacy would come along and say, "Well, you've been doing that for 17 years." Yeah, so anyway, the first essay is what I called.
Put your eyes on it.
Cooking Jack's Goose. Does anyone remember that one? Jack showed up Thanksgiving morning, a goose in a grain bag tossed over his left shoulder. First problem was the goose was still alive. Second problem was it had been in that bag for 2 days already. Norman laughed that wonderful laugh of his and told Jack we didn't eat the goose. Thank you very much. Our Thanksgiving turkey was already in the oven. Jack was more than just a little perplexed and asked what he should do with his bird. I seized the moment, knowing that Jack was vulnerable, and suggested setting it free down in the fields. I bet it's pretty cramped in that bag, I added. As if it understood my words, the poor thing thrashed in the sack on Jack's back and offered a throaty, confused honk. Well, there's always Christmas, Barbara called from the kitchen, and so began the saga of Jack's holiday goose. Jack, of course, was none other than Jack Depp, a wonderful family friend. I can see Jack Gable doing the same thing, now that I think of it. A wonderful family friend with more than a flair for the eclectic. He lived in New York City and wished that he was living in Maine. He was one of Vicki Crandall's secret weapons back in the Brunswick Music Theater days, and is the same Jack Depp who went on to establish the Chocolate Church for the Performing Arts in Bath. And yes, he is the painter of our lovely print, Last Christmas at Gurnett. We really should get the poor thing out of that bag, Norman was quick to realize. What do you think, Frank? Do you have a place for him in your barn up in Bodenham? Norman had come to realize that my barn was a safe haven for many a bizarre keepsake, and the fact was that I was already creating a place for the turkey in my mind. Norman, Jack, Miles, and I forsook the warmth of the dining room fireplace, ignored the Macy's parade for a flying trip to Bodenham. When we headed for the comfort of Norman's grand Chevrolet wagon, he suggested that the crew might instead pile into Jack's Volkswagen Bug. I bet it already smells bad, he guessed. You gotta try and picture 3 grown men, a bigger than most teenager, and a 15-pound bag of live goose in that tiny car. Did I tell you the car was already full of Jack's books, Jack's clothes, Jack's bottles, a 1/4 ton of Jack's other stuff? Norman was right, by the way. The car did already smell like abused goose, or something worse. Jack always had a tendency to drive fast and reckless, and this very morning, he was motivated. Even Norman was offering encouragement, saying the quicker we got the bird settled, the quicker we could get home to the hearth and fire. Miles dropped his window as we crossed the bridge to Topsom, saying something about the cold air outside being better than the air in the car. My barn was never intended to house transient geese. There was a large corner for firewood, a loft for old furniture, a room with my workshop, a corner privy, a general area overloaded with culch, and not much more room for extra stuff. I focused on an old horse stall loaded with kids' toys, emptied it in about 2 minutes, boarded over the front with 2 wooden pallets, and told Jack to bring on the goose. I don't think I've ever seen a bird move any faster. Maybe he'll be smart enough to escape when we go back to Brunswick, Miles muttered under his breath. You know, there's a month between Turkey Day and Christmas. The first several days I spent risking my life building a better house for our holiday guest. The pallets were switched out for a wire mesh. I added an old chicken waterer, a pan of grain, lots of sawdust for the floor, all the while watching my back as this less than happy goose contemplated revenge on my lower half at every available moment. It's safe to say that the personality of that goose had been altered for what remained of his life. Miles suggested that he suffered from PTSD, and I suggested that was a bad joke. Our sweet and gentle Abby, who has tamed feral cats and could find kind words for the worst of situations, soon realized that her efforts were wasted on this hissing, thrashing bird beast. After 2 or 3 days, maintenance of the bird became mine. It was 2 days before Christmas when we enlisted our old friend Ori to come over and do the deed to our goose. We collected the ropes, the pans of boiling water, the sheets and the bags for feathers, and all the other stuff needed for the execution. Both our kids made themselves scarce. Gentle Abby with the parting words, "This is gonna be the worst day of my life." Ori made the process look as painless and professional as possible. I took the newly processed bird to our refrigerator, predicting it would be a perfect Christmas feast. But my favorite butcher, Oric, grabbed my arm and almost screamed at my lack of experience. "Frank," he said, "you can't have this bird for Christmas. It has to cure for at least a day or 4. Jane only shook her head at the new information and sent me to the store to buy a Christmas ham before they were all gone. We called Jack that night and we told him he'd need to spend a few extra days in Maine if he really wanted to enjoy that goose. It was going to be served on New Year's Day, not Christmas. So the Mariners and the Connors, with Jack and with friends, did all gather together in Gurnett for holiday goose that year, even if it was a month and 2 holidays late. In a matter of minutes, that beautiful beast was reduced to a collection of white bones suitable only for a soup. I think it was Henry who claimed it was the very best goose that he had ever eaten, and we all agreed that it was worth the wait. Everyone but the goose. This one is called their Florida thing. You heard this before, Bernie? Yeah. Okay. If you have any familiarity with my work at all, you realize that my family and surrounding friends are constant victims from my memories. This is called their Florida thing. About 5 years after their retirement, and when our kids were slightly teens, in-laws Norman and Barbara got tired of the depressing 6-month ice, snow, cold cycle that is Maine winter and decided to go do their Florida thing. Turns out it was one of the nicest things that they ever did for my family. Now don't you misunderstand. Norman and Barbara were the very best in-laws that I've ever had, and their contributions to my family were historically huge and constant. But early on, there was more than a little anxiety about the transition. Norman was a homeboy at heart, often explaining that Brunswick was about as far away from Topsom as he really needed to be. He was a Topsom native. He didn't mind plowing and shoveling snow. He could easily and happily spend months watching sports programming on television, and never was a great fan of spending a lot of money. "I could be pretty happy staying right here," he said more than once. But when Barbara floated an idea, it usually took root. And back in those days, my Jane was dabbling in real estate and helped with some of the detail work. Finally, they left for 3 months, in the Sunshine State on the following Super Bowl Sunday. The place where they landed in Clearwater, Florida, was an opposite to their old farmhouse in Brunswick. The apartment they rented was on the 11th floor of a Gulfside condo, a glass and concrete framed thing that looked more like a shoebox than a cake. There was a heated pool separating them from the beach and the Gulf, and a constant warmish breeze reminded them that snow was a forgettable, foreign thing in Florida. The Mariners had this big blue Chevy Caprice wagon back in those days. It was so long, so wide, so smooth, I used to refer to it as the hearse. A fellow could stretch out on one of those seats and think he'd just rented a hotel room. Norman would load that thing to its dome lights with only essentials, everything from a bean pot to chocolate donuts, and away they'd drive. They did actually leave on the Saturday before Super Bowl Sunday, driving to Pennsylvania, where a favorite motel had a widescreen TV and a tub, and they'd rest out. Norman did the Super Bowl on the television, Barbara did the soak in the tub. By the next day, they'd be in the Carolinas or Georgia, and by now, Norman was focused on Florida, and there was no more fooling around. I think it was their second winter when we Connors made our first trip to Florida. We found some money, bought some plane tickets, and for a week boarded in with the in-laws. Those visits gave my kids their first plane rides, their first visits to Disney World and to Busch Gardens and to the Florida Keys and to the Everglades. But there was so much more. At a time in their life when kids often separate themselves from families, mine developed lasting and loving bonds with their grandparents and with Jane and with me. Norman willingly flipped us the keys to that Caprice, and we would disappear for days at a time, exploring beaches, finding shells, poking down back roads, picking oranges and grapefruit, stalking wild and tame game, taking airboat rides, shopping, making new friends. We created dozens of adventures that remain in the lore of the Connors family even now. Some years we take the kids out of school. Sometimes we focused on school vacation calendars. Usually it was more about the cost of the tickets and about our work schedules, because we knew the kids would learn more and grow more with us that week in Florida than they would ever learn in public school in Bowdoin. Several years the kids did daily journals that fulfilled school requirements and became the basis of maintaining family records and history over the years. Jane and I still cherish those logs as glimpses into the kids' early lives. Last weekend, we had an evening where we read Miles's log to his 7-year-old son, Jaden. Just the other day, after I came in from chipping yet another snowstorm off our cars, Jane looked at me and she said, "Really? Isn't it time for us to think about heading south and wait for the kids to come visit us?" We doing okay? This was gonna be my my last one, but I'm changing the format a little bit. This one's called Sweet Little M&Ms. It really was an awkward moment. My 2 grandsons standing expectantly in front of me, one thin 1.74 ounce bag of M&M peanut-filled chocolate candies clutched in my hand. How could I tell them I didn't expect to see them that day, that I was planning to eat all the candy myself? I couldn't, of course not. I winked at Abby, suggested a game to the boys. "Hey," said I, "every bag of M&Ms has blue, red, yellow, orange, chocolate, and green candies inside, right?" 2 little heads nodded to the affirmative. "Let's each pick our favorite color, and we'll divide the candies based on the color that we like best." Both Silas and Xander looked at me with not a little suspicion, no doubt thinking about deals that they've struck with their bumpy in the past. 6-year-old Silas went for it first, nodded, smiled happily, and said, "Red." I almost guessed, because I knew red was his favorite color. 3-year-old Xander was tougher. He had his hands on his hips trying to outfox the old fox. "What happens to the extra colors?" he wanted to know. I shrugged. "Why don't we give them to your mother?" Abby was quick to back away, waving both hands. "You can divide what's left 3 ways," she said. "I don't need to be in this little contest." Almost as an afterthought, I told the boys that I would take the blue ones. "Yellow," Xander said, finally holding out his hand. I ripped the bag open, poured the contents into a pot I always carry in the back of my truck, and a quick look told me there was going to be trouble. 1 yellow, 3 red, a bucket full of blue, and a few orange and a couple of chocolates. I took the yellow one and dropped it into Xander's hand and watched his eyes cross. "1, he said. 1? I don't like this game. I don't want to pick another color." Silas didn't appear too happy either. Xander took another look at the bucket and announced, "I'll take the blue ones."
Oh, sure.
I popped a blue M&M in my mouth. Xander threw his yellow one back into the pail. "Okay," said I. "We'll do 3 piles, even Steven."
Hello.
Xander grabbed the bucket, handed it to his brother, and looked at me sternly. "Silas gets to count," he added, "and you ate one already." Maybe you never wondered where the name M&M came from, but me, I spend time worrying about details like that. It seems that in 1941, a Mr. Forrest Mars Sr. of the Mars Candy fortune was looking to collaborate with the folks over at the Hershey's Chocolate Company. They were kicking around a plan to create a new candy, something like a chocolate nibble in a hard candy shell. First ones were only chocolate covered, multicolored came later. Mars worked with Bruce Murray, a son of the Hershey family, and M&Ms were born. Isn't America wonderful? Thanks, Anita. You all know Anita, our nutritionist here? She Googled it for me, but she didn't really want to do it because she doesn't think M&M should be part of anyone's diet. So one last confession and we'll leave this silly subject. Years ago, I was standing in Dave's Variety eating my daily hot dog. As was my habit, I'd chat up the regulars, offer my hi to Rachel, complimenting her on cooking yet another great meal, and read the headlines from the daily newspapers. If it was a Tuesday or a Thursday, I'd go to the candy rack and select my bag of M&M peanut candies. Dessert, I used to like to call it. It's true, M&M candies are sold by weight. But another truth I have discovered is that there can be as many as 24 candies in one of those ounce and 3/4 bags, and as few as 19. I consider it a better lunch when I get closer to 24 than 19. So I developed the habit, as discreet as possible, of picking up a bag, moving the candies around, and counting them. I did that for more months than I remember until that black day when Rachel caught me. She came right out from behind her hot dog steamer, got in my face and said, "Frank, why are you handling my candy? Can't you just pick one?" she suggested. Embarrassed that she caught me, I never explained to her the reason I might touch 3, maybe 4 bags of candy before I selected the one I was taking home. This one will do, I said, picking the bag that I held right in my hand. I'm guessing it's a good thing that I like the peanut candies, not the regular M&Ms. It would be very hard to count the individual pieces in one of those bags. And I finished by saying, may the coming new year bring you and yours only good stuff. But before you leave, Ralph, I'm gonna read one more. If there are 4 or 5 essays in Stones and Stories that were never published in People Plus News, and so the only way you read them is if you buy the book. Except I'm going to read you this last one. It's the way I closed the book and tried to transition into my Vietnam letters. So it was called That Picture. And if you came to my Veterans Day program last year, you saw the picture that was done to me when I was young, long time ago. Anyway, 3 days before leaving home for my year in Vietnam, there I was with an appointment to have my portrait made at Brunswick's Pierce studio. No expense was to be spared, my mother had decreed, so my plan was to put on my dress greens and take the process very seriously. My older brother Grant suggested that Ma was worried that I wouldn't be coming home, and she wanted an image that she could remember me with. I tried to make light of the experience and was happy to hear that the proofs wouldn't be ready for a month when I'd be tucked away safe in a combat zone and halfway around the world. But the real story of that picture started the night before. I'd gone to spend the night at a friend's home in Rockport, and it was almost midnight when I finally remembered the picture was to be taken the next morning at 9:15 a.m. Maybe I needed to leave. My friend seemed unsympathetic to my plight, suggested I should walk home if I really had to go. There was a short, pointed discussion in which I was reminded that the car in the yard wasn't mine, and about 12:35, I was doing my best airborne shuffle down a very deserted Route 90, hoping that I'd finally hit all night traffic when I reached Route 1. Maybe 3 cars and a bait truck passed me during the next 2 hours of my life. And they all flipped the lights on high beams and accelerated when they saw me standing hopefully in the dark with my thumb pointed at them. Should have worn my uniform, I said to myself more than once. I almost stepped on a skunk eating roadkill in Warren. I spooked more deer than I could count, and by the time I hit that hill in Waldoboro, most of the airborne was gone from my shuffle. Dawn was cracking in Nobleboro when a welder headed for BIW stopped and gave me an apple from his lunchbox and gave me a ride to the fair side of the Carlton Bridge. He told me he was a veteran of the big war. He called Vietnam a cesspool, and he wished me well. I got another ride from Witch Spring Hill in Topsom to Topsom 5 minutes later, and once I was back on Route 24, a friend stopped, told me he thought I'd already left for the Nam, and drove me right to my door. As I was getting out of his car, he wished me luck and told me I was looking pretty tired. He had no idea. Mom met me right at the front door, suggested I shower real quick and suit up. You have dated the photographer in an hour and a half, she said, and the rest of the day went pretty well after that. That full-color 20 by 36 picture of me hung in my mother's living room for the next 30 years, right beside an identical color photo of my younger brother Alden, who served in Vietnam the year after I left. We used to call it Mother's recruiting wall. But we'd often joke about the pictures being the good luck charm that brought us both home. We did make a handsome couple, my soldier brother and me. Don't every man look just great in a uniform? Then came the day when Mom called me at work and offered me the picture. She was repapering and repainting her front room and decided she was going to hang something else in that spot. Are you leaving Alden off the wall too? I wanted to know. When she said yes, I told her I didn't really know what I'd do with the picture. It's kind of big, I said. Don't you think Jane might want it? Mom asked, and I chuckled. Then I reminded her, Jane has the real thing. I don't think she needs a picture. Not an hour later, Jane called me. It's too bad Jane laughed, isn't it? I should be crawling on some chairs right now. Not an hour later, Jane called me at work, and she was upset. My mother had just visited, offered Jane the picture, and Jane had kind of laughed lightly and told my mother, quite frankly, she didn't need the big old picture, she had the big old guy. And she liked him best out of his uniform. When my mother took that answer a little bit poorly, Jane said she followed her to her car, trying to re-engage her, and Jane said, there it was. That damn picture was right there in the seat beside her. I didn't have the heart to tell Jane just then that I had had the same offer and made the same conclusion. Maybe later, thinks I, when we've all had a little bit of time to calm down. So Alden's image and mine spent the next decade or so face to face on a shelf in one of my mother's darkest closets. Then one fate-filled November day, I was inviting Mom to Jane's surprise birthday party. And she asked me what Jane might want as a present. You know, said I, after a couple suggestions went flat, why don't you just wrap that great old picture of me in my uniform and just give it to her? I bet she'd love it.
It's too bad Jane's not here.
Mom said neither nay or yay, but I kind of chuckled to myself when she came to my brother's house for the party a couple of weeks later, carrying this lovely, oversized package that could have only been one or two or maybe three things. Jane suspected nothing. She merrily unwrapped gift after gift, holding up new blouses, handing around boxes of candy. I'm thinking one of my sisters, probably Glenna, one of my sisters handed Jane the big box. Jane took it, shook it, and rattled it. Still had no idea. Off came the ribbon. She even tried to save the paper. The box was that big. Ma had crafted it from a larger recycled carton. Jane had to borrow a knife and cut the tape and stand to look inside. I'm guessing Jane recognized the frame. The grin on her face evaporated. She peered coldly over her glasses in my direction. And then, almost as quick, the smile came back. "Oh, Frank," she cooed. "Look, it's that wonderful picture of you when you were handsome." Nice shot, thinks I, but there's gonna be more. Jane hauled that photo out of its box, lied to Mom that she loved it, and held it high for everyone to admire. I think it was my Aunt Jean who said, "You really were a good-looking soldier boy, Frank." I'm certain it was Jane who answered, "But he might not look good tomorrow." So, one of the biggest problems we had this book was how are you gonna meld stories like that with a bunch of letters from Vietnam? And I was more invested in the letters at this point in my life than I was in the essays that, and the paper, so. So I told you earlier, we had put them all together, and last year for Christmas, I gave each of my grandsons a 40-page transcript that I had developed based on the letters after reading them all. And it's pretty much the same transcript that I read here last November. So the last third of the book probably is a collection of those letters. I'm just going to read a few of them and tell you, you just got to buy the book. So, and we included some pictures when I was young. There was one that almost became a centerfold, but we didn't quite get it either. This was dated 29 June 1967. It's, "Hi all, I'm here now in the Republic of Vietnam, 25 miles north of Saigon. I may be at my permanent unit and able to give you an address by the end of the week. I sure hope so. I'm getting lonesome. We spent almost 22 hours a year coming over here, head stops for petrol and pee breaks in San Francisco, Honolulu, Wake Island, Okinawa, and then to Benoit. There's a 12-hour difference, and we're across the date line, so it's the 29th here and still the 28th in Bowden. It's awful hot here. The temperature is about 90 degrees all day, but the humidity is ridiculous, and we've had 6 different downpours since I got here. Camp LBJ is just a huge pile of red mud most of the time. Everything is sandbagged 4 feet tall and all around. We have 5 shower heads for 400 men, and the cold water is limited to 5 gallons a day per man. We have no mirrors to shave with, no hot water, and no electricity. Oh yes, I almost forgot. All human waste is collected in steel fuel drums and destroyed daily by burning it with diesel fuel. You just gotta smell that to understand how much fun it is. Right, Jack? Yeah. What I've seen of Vietnam and its people so far hasn't impressed me a bit. The land is unbelievably dirty, and the standard of living, I don't think they have one yet. Since it's raining again, I guess I'll go outside after dark and wash down in my birthday suit. Guess I'll quit for now. I want to write Judy before it gets too dark. The 3rd of July, 1967, I wrote, "It's official. No longer am I in the Screaming Eagles of the 101st Airborne. I'm now in the 173rd Airborne Brigade, the Herd. I'm told it's the best airborne outfit in Vietnam. It was the first complete Army unit sent here in May of 1965. Talk about landing in the limelight. You may remember reading in the papers last week about a company from the 173rd getting wiped out. 76 men from a company of 100 were killed. Yep, it was Alpha Company, my company. If you can find a story about that battle, I wish you'd save it for me when I get home. Actually, I think this is better than it seems. I'm thinking they'll be building a brand new unit, so we probably won't be seeing too much hot stuff, at least not for a while. In the other letter I sent this morning, you'll find a Red Cross card that you should hang on to. If anything bad happens on your side of the Pacific, use it to get to me through the Red Cross. I can be on my way home in 24 hours. This AM, I had 5 flu shots in my first malaria treatment. 5th of July. Tomorrow, believe it or not, I go on my first combat mission. Forget about the jungle school. I guess it was a joke if I ever heard one. We'll have a 2-day search and destroy. And back on Monday, we'll be going north to dig into the North Vietnamese regulars. On the 7th of July, I wrote, I'm back from my first search and destroy mission. It went just wonderfully. We made no contact. We found and destroyed 2 deserted bunkers, but saw no sign of Charlie anywhere. The jungle over here is unbelievable. Take the worst 50 square yards of entangled brush that you can find anywhere in Maine, make it twice as bad, and then try to maneuver through it for thousands of meters on a set compass course. It's really hard. The first 2 days of jungle school, I had no canteens, no poncho, no entrenching tool, no bayonet, and no cleaning equipment for my weapon. And my M16 had a bullet hole through its stock. That's how I went into the boonies yesterday, except that a guy gave me a canteen. I guess I'm just glad that I'm a member of the best equipped army in the world. As you know, my own private life was far from settled. This will make you buy the book. It was far from settled when I left home. Judy and Amy, I mean. I'm writing to them both, even though I think I'm still engaged to one. Well, I told Judy I was writing to Amy and I'm wondering what will happen. Maybe it's good that I'm over here. Hadn't had any mail from anyone yet. The problem is that they're both wonderful girls, and well, I just want your assurance that it wasn't wrong to kind of string them both along. I hope you'll be nice to both of them. Treat me as you would treat me, treat them as you would treat me, and it'll all come out in the wash, right? I'll keep you posted on what develops. A year is a long time. I know a lot will happen, and a lot can happen to us all. I got my first injury in a combat zone this morning. We were hauling barbed wire around the perimeter. I tripped and a barb got caught on my shoulder and tore a 3-inch rip in it. I bled like a pig. Medic put some tape on it. Doesn't think I'll need stitches, and he said I'll need to try harder if I want to qualify for a Purple Heart. 10th of July, I wrote, Alpha Company got hit again last night. I wasn't with them. I'm now in a Montagnard village in the Central Highlands called Dak To. It's a special forces camp, and there's an airstrip, and it's now the home of the 173rd and 2nd Battalion. Our job is to secure the area and protect the airstrip. We're in a valley between 2 mountain ranges, not unlike the Camden Hills in height, but oh so much steeper. The village is unbelievably dirty. Mud, this place is one big sea of it. And on the 14th of July, I wrote, today it happened, folks, I got mail. Mail is money over here, really. 17th of July, I wrote, my clothes haven't been dry for the past 3 days. I spent last night in ambush down a ridge and maybe 400 meters from the base camp. We set up claymores, had a machine gun, and 10 M16s. We were all wicked tired, had to stay awake all night. Today we get to go down to the river and bathe. 20 guys in the water, 40 up for security. Can't wait to get in. I'm very brown now and I want to see how much of it washes off. "24th of July, which was my 21st birthday. We're so deep in the jungle now that we have to resupply every 3 or 4 days by choppers hovering over the trees 150 feet above us and dropping in the ammo and the rations and everything but replacements. Please send more paper and more moisture-proof envelopes. Lately I've had time to write letters, but no supplies. We go days without seeing the sun. The jungle is very thick. Often we walk under a vine roof in the trees 150 to 200 feet over our heads. We eat sea rations or go hungry. We catch rain in ponchos, and mail is every 2 or 3 days if we're lucky. Another thing, we aren't fighting the VC up here. We're chasing North Vietnamese regulars, and they're pretty good at what they do too. Yesterday, the paymaster informed me the United States Army owes me $726 for the months of June and July. This is, 14 August. Our last mission, we went 21 days without seeing any other Americans except the chopper pilots and our own company. It really does get lonesome over here. We have to move every day regardless of the weather. Dak To is the brigade rest area. We're here relaxing between missions, resupplying, getting new troops, more training, eating real food, resting, and riding home. In a recent letter, Mrs. Hunter told me, "We know where your mother's heart is. When we go by your house, the flag is always waving proudly." 17th of August. I had 4 letters from you this evening, 2 from Judy, 1 from Aunt Jeanette, and 1 from Allison. I must say, lately I've fared pretty well with the old Pony Express. Right when you can, I love the mail. 19th of August. About 1500, we got to our ambush site. It was a bridge. All night long, believe it or not, we sat in water 6 inches deep. Mosquitoes were so thick, we'd pot them with our hands before we'd move. A fellow will be lucky not to catch pneumonia or malaria over here. Three days ago, we lost a chopper. The first one I've seen go down since getting here, so you know they're pretty safe. We got the crew out just before the thing exploded. They were mad because they had to hump with us for a day before we got them out. For your general information, Dak is Vietnamese for hill or mountain. That's why so many places around here have the prefix Dak To or Dak Siang or Dak Shit. Ha! That, I'm only kidding about that last one. We haven't been there yet. This will have to be short. I have to get my gear in order before dark. We're out of here at 0700 tomorrow, going up in the hills to chase the enemy again. I have no idea how long we'll be up there or when my next letter will go to the good people in Bodendale. So I'm going to stop. My throat's getting a little hot. If any of you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Or I could just answer that phone. Thank you.